Welcome to episode 68 of Stageworthy. I'm your host, Phil Rickaby. Stageworthy is a podcast featuring conversations in Canadian theatre with actors, directors, playwrights, and more. If you want to drop Stageworthy a line, you can find us on Facebook and Twitter at StageworthyPod, and you can find the website at stageworthypodcast.com. If you like what you hear, I hope you'll consider leaving a comment or rating on iTunes or whatever podcast app you use. Comments really help people find the show. My guest is Rob Kempson. Rob is a theatre artist and educator. His play Trigonometry opens March 16th and runs until March 25th at Toronto's Factory Theatre. Tell me about Trigonometry, the play. I mean, so I'm one of those people who, like, math is one of those things that I avoid. So, Trigonometry, the play, how much of it has to do with math? And, tell me about that show.
Yeah, I don't like math either. So let's start there. I did okay in math in high school, so it wasn't an issue of, like, having sort of a strong aversion to it forever. I just never liked it. Mm-hmm. But when I started writing the play, I was really inspired by Sarah Ruhl's book, 100 Essays I Don't Have Time to Write. Mm-hmm. And in there, she talks a lot about play structure in several of the essays. And in one of them, she, in particular, talks about the structure of the arc and why we conceive of the arc as the shape that is ideal for plays, which I thought was a really interesting thought, just because it's not something that had ever crossed my mind. Certainly I've worked in different structures before, but thinking about the association with a given shape was a new idea for me. And just sort of offhandedly, she questions, what would happen if a play was a triangle play or a square play? And I wondered, what if a play was a triangle play? And so then I started thinking about what that would mean structurally. And it's actually from there that I moved into the play being called Trigonometry, and that the one of the characters is a math teacher teaching trigonometry. And so it was, in fact, out of the structure of the play, this idea of this triangle, that I started to explore how deep I could run those routes, and then it ended up turning into part of the story too.
Did you figure out what a triangle play looks like?
I mean, I hope so. I don't know if I have or not. For me, if you know trigonometry and you're, like, particularly interested in sort of the math aspect of the play is designed around the three trigonometric functions, which are sine, cosine, and tangent. And each of those functions basically allows you to calculate different things based on the relationship between angles and length of sides on a right angle triangle, and eventually any triangle, but primarily a right angle triangle. And so in writing the play, I have each scene explores one of those functions. So the first scene is sine, and that's opposite over hypotenuse is how you would calculate that. And the second scene is cosine, and that's adjacent over hypotenuse, which is how that's calculated. And then the third scene is tan, or tangent, and that is opposite over adjacent. Mm-hmm. And that's all in the calculation of a given angle relationship. But in the play, I've sort of extrapolated on that idea, assigned each of the three characters to a part of the triangle, and then played with the idea that one character starts in a given power or status sort of structure over another character based on these trigonometric functions. Okay. And so if you're, like, a real math nerd and that's interesting to you, then you can figure that out. Right. Or a theater nerd who, like, pretends to be a math nerd for a minute, like I am. Yeah. But there's only one actual equation in the play. So I think it's a triangle play in the sense that I've tried really hard to use that structure to my advantage and not push against it too much. does the play also have an arc? Yeah, I mean, I hope so. Like, I hope that you walk out of it feeling like the characters have gone on a journey.
Right.
But I do think that structurally the play works in these sort of 3 separate sections. Yeah.
Cool. Was there something in particular that you were inspired by aside from the triangle or the trigonometry for this?
Yeah, this is the 3rd play in my series, The Graduation Plays. And each of the graduation plays are plays that examine the sort of complexity of relationships between teachers and students in a high school environment. And each of the plays really are about a time when a student disrupts a power structure. So in a school, we assume that the power is concurrent, I guess, or coincident with the authority. So the principal is at the top, followed by the vice principal, followed by department heads, etc. And students are at the bottom. And I am really interested in these 3 works interested in the way that students can take back power and throw off that traditional structure. So I liken this play to the other 2. They're all thematically related. You don't have to have seen any of them to understand the next one, because they don't have characters who cross all 3 plays or anything. But they're all kind of about the same thing. They're about a student disrupting a power structure in a high school. And the way that I enter into them is from a different perspective. So the first play, Shannon&nbsp, which we did at VideoFag in 2015, is arguably primarily a student perspective into that problem. Mockingbird, which I did at the Next Stage Festival in 2016, is a teacher perspective into that problem. And Trigonometry, I think, is a parent perspective. And so the inspiration for all of them come from the fact that I work a lot in schools, both as a guest artist and as a supply teacher. And I have my Bachelor of Ed, and teaching is a really important part of my artistic practice. And,
that was actually going to be my next question, is what it was that draws you into the idea of students disrupting that structure. Have you seen that happen?
Oh my gosh, it happened to me yesterday, actually. I was in a school that shall remain nameless, teaching for a teacher who I have great respect for and who's a good friend of mine. And a student hijacked my class. And I mean, it's not the first time that that's ever happened, but a student hijacking the class, meaning that like they know enough about the system that they know how to disrupt it from within it, if that makes sense. And one of the things that I have found, and this didn't happen yesterday, but one of the things that I've found or seen a lot is that a lot of that ends up coming from students' expression of sexuality in some capacity. So exerting themselves as sexual beings, because teachers don't have any kind of a defense against that. Because they can't talk about it in schools, because the sex ed curriculum is quite rigid and not, in fact, very progressive. Although this play deals with sort of the new sex ed curriculum that was first introduced in 2015 and then was protested and then protested again. Anyways, is now in place, sort of. But that disabling of a teacher's sort of all of the things that they have in their toolkit is something that's really interesting to me. It's also terrifying when it happens as a teacher, like that you can't do anything. So yesterday, like a student hijacked my class just by being a jerk and sort of getting crazy. And then another student filmed my interaction with that student. And that filming of it is, in fact, the plot point of Shannon&nbsp, which is the first play in this series. But I'm certainly not embarrassed by anything that happened in that interaction. I wouldn't be worried about anyone seeing that video. But because students have cell phones and they have access to technology, and all of that stuff, social media and etc., starts to blur the lines. And I have students try to add me on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter all the time.
Of course.
And you really have to. There's no specific rules about how that works. And I know lots of teachers who have their students on Facebook, and I know lots of teachers who don't even have Facebook, and I know everything in between. So the blurring of those lines is actually, I think, a really good indicator of the blurring of lines that happen in person too. That teaching is ultimately a human thing. It's a human art form. It's imperfect. And I think that those environments are rich for really complex confrontations and interactions. And it's a right place to write a play about.
And just the idea that whatever you do in that class, there's somebody who has a phone and could film it.
Yeah,
and there's
absolutely.
A permanent record of that.
Well, and that you have a phone in that class too, right? Like, sort of, you extrapolate on it and think about all of the ways in which technology in the classroom can affect the classroom.
Yeah.
So, in the play, certainly the use of phones. There's two sort of big pieces of plot come from phones, and that's a reflection on our current world, but it's also a reflection on the things that I think are dangerous and terrifying about working in schools as an educator.
Interesting thing. I remember I was just thinking about seeing in some kind of playwriting or script writing book about how using a phone was a cheat. And this, of course, was an old book.
Yeah.
Like having somebody call another person, that's a cheat. That's a shortcut. Don't use that. But now, in a realistic situation, we would not even call, we would text.
Yeah.
And how does one do that?
You know
on
what?
stage?
I tend to agree with that playwriting book that using a phone is a cheat, just like using a gun is a cheat, and using a gun is a terrible cheat. But using a phone is a cheat in the sense that if you use a phone to reveal information that you could reveal in a different, better written way, then it's a cheat.
Yeah.
But if you use the phone as the action of the scene, then it's not a cheat, I don't think. If the response to what's happening on the phone creates more action, then I don't think it's a cheat. Maybe it is. I don't know. But in this play, all of the phone use isn't about actually using a phone as a phone. It's about texting or other sort of media and stuff that can happen on a phone.
Right.
And so, in particular, in one of the scenes, every time a character receives a text message, the temper of the scene changes because, or temper, that's not what I'm looking for. Different word. Timbre, tone, something of the scene changes. And the idea is that the phone is instigating some of the conversation that's happening. And that's interesting because it's between two adults. One who sort of uses a phone a lot and one who doesn't.
Right.
And that becomes a source of conflict. It's not the main source of conflict. I think when phones on stage become a problem now are when people are trying to do things like have Skype conversations on stage.
Right.
Or have a character on their phone just scrolling because they don't know what else to do.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think more broadly, I mean, if we really consider how that then plays to the use of any object on stage. If you're using any object to fill time rather than to create an action, then it's a cheat.
Yes. Yeah.
Arguably. A phone just has the unique capacity to actually connect you with other humans.
Yeah.
But the same thing is true, like if you look at a computer on stage or you project a character in on Skype on stage, those are not action-driven things.
Yeah.
Necessarily. I mean, I guess the line is variable, but
it's so hard because I know the impulse to try to be like, this is what people would do now.
Yeah.
But does that serve the story, and is it really the best way to do it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the example is in Mockingbird, my last show, there are no phones on stage. And in fact, we had a conversation during one of the rehearsals where it takes place in a contemporary staff room. It talks about quite contemporary things. There are 11 people in the show. And one of the actors was like, well, I think my character would probably be like, bored and scrolling through an iPad in this moment because it's a staff room. But we have no phones in this show. Does this world have phones? And I said, yeah, it totally does. These are just English teachers. They read books. Like, they don't need to, they don't have any, they don't need to scroll through their phones all the time. But it very much takes place in this world. But I also think that from a writing perspective in that play, I'm looking at a room where I have, the potential to have 11 people in that room.
Yeah.
I don't need a phone to drive any of the action.
No.
I have 11 people.
Yeah.
Whereas this play only has 3 people. And so if I can use some offstage characters vis-a-vis these phones, then it expands the world and sort of creates a sense of what's happening outside of the world of the play. And I think that's one of the most important things about this series for me is that feeling that the school is omnipresent, right? Like that you understand that this one room or this one interaction that you're seeing is part of a much bigger ecosystem that these characters are living in.
Yeah. I'm so curious about the teaching aspect of your life.
Yeah.
But I want to come back to that.
Yeah,
because first I want to know about why you chose the theater as something that you do. Like, was there some desire from when you were young that made you want to be an actor? How did you become an actor, playwright, director, producer of your work?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm mostly not an actor anymore. I've certainly acted enough times, but it's not, I don't pursue acting as my profession, I think. I think the reason why I'm in theater right now as a playwright and director primarily is because when I go to see a show and when I want to make a show, all of the considerations that I make or think about are all the big picture considerations. So I can certainly talk about someone's performance separate from the show, but I'm actually more interested in what does the overall vision of the show look like? What does the what is the writing doing? How is that driving? I mean, such a big question. God. I started working I fell in love with theater when I saw The Phantom of the Opera when I was 7, like I think everyone in my age bracket did. And I fell in love with it because, there were lots of interesting technical things happening and, magic on stage. But I also fell in love with it because I remember being 7 and being emotionally moved and crying and not understanding why I was crying because I wasn't sad.
Right. Yes.
And realizing that kind of power existed, that something could be made to make me have an emotional response, but that it's an emotional response that's false because it's not my own emotions.
Right.
And I think I was like pretty wowed by that. And I also didn't come from a theater family, so certainly no one in my family knows anything about theater or plays music or anything like that. And I think, I don't know, I came out of the womb wanting to like put on shows for people, and I wanted to learn piano. I think I'm the only kid ever who like asked my mother to sign me up for piano lessons, and she said no. Because we didn't have a piano. Right. And she was like, well, that's silly. How do you, like, you don't even know that you want this. And I'm sure I asked for, 7 different things a week. So, so eventually I think it just became clear that the way that I could best communicate was through the arts in some capacity. It became more difficult in high school because I spent a lot of time doing theater and music, but I was very good in math and science and those things, so people thought that I should do that. But I think that that's actually just the sign of like a type A personality, like I'm a work hard kind of person, and a perfectionist, which is like not necessarily a good thing to have in theater, either of those things. But then when I went to Queen's and did concurrent education, and when I first left high school, all I wanted to do was become a high school drama teacher. And so I went into Con Ed so that I could do that. And my intention was to have drama as a third teachable and actually take music and geography because that was much more important. And thankfully at Queen's, not thankfully, but thankfully for me, you can't take a science, physical geography, with an art as a double major.
Okay.
So I ended up taking drama instead and then took geography as my third teachable. And then like by third or fourth year had done enough shows that I thought I would like to do this instead of just teaching this. I would like to actually do this. So I feel like a bit of a late bloomer in that way. Like I certainly wasn't a kid who, my school didn't participate in the Sears Festival. Right. I never wrote a play in high school. I never wrote a play in elementary school. I certainly put on like shows for my family, but it wasn't really until really even the end of my undergrad that I started conceiving of myself primarily as a writer. And I guess sort of meandered my way through from there.
Did you become a drama teacher, or did you concentrate more on doing the theater?
Yeah, I mean, I have been an employee of the Toronto District School Board for the last decade, but always as an occasional teacher. So I've only ever supply taught, and I like supply teaching. It's quite fun. There's a supply teacher in this show, and there wasn't one in the previous 2 incarnations, and I thought that was missing, so I made sure that one was a supply teacher in this show. I have been offered some other teaching contracts. Teaching contracts seem to be a little bit easier for me to access than some other contracts. So I've not taken any full-time teaching contracts, but I've certainly taught a lot.
Right.
And then I worked in arts education a lot administratively as well. So I worked at Young People's Theatre for years in various different capacities, and they're an amazing organization where education is really at the heart of the art that they make. I was the education manager at Canadian Stage for 3 years, and through my role as the associate artistic producer at Theatre Passe Muraille, a lot of my role was also education focused. It was sort of a split education and then artistic sort of stuff.
Right.
So I did a lot of that work. I was a founding board member for PAONI, which is the Professional Arts Organizations Network for Education.
Nice.
And now that I work at the Thousand Islands Playhouse as the associate artistic director, I direct the kids show that tours to all sorts of communities across Eastern Ontario, and I really love that part of my job.
Nice.
So I often say that teaching for a lot of people can become a Joe job, and certainly every day of supply teaching is not the most personally fulfilling day that I've ever had. But teaching will always be a part of my artistic practice.
Right.
So I teach a lot of high school students. I teach a lot of teachers as a guest artist. So I do a lot of guest artist work where the teacher is in the room.
Right.
I do a lot of guest artist work in professional development days for teachers, that kind of stuff. And I learn from teaching about my own artistic practice. My artistic practice is made better as a result of my teaching practice, and vice versa. The more art I make, the better teacher I am. The more teaching I do, the better artist I am.
Interesting.
And for me, those things must be parallel, and will always be parallel. Sometimes when the weight is not equally distributed between the two, and it more leans on the education side, I find myself less inspired to sort of be inspired, I guess, by the work that I'm doing educationally.
Yeah.
But I love teaching. I really do. And I've worked a lot in community arts too. So I've taught, between ages of 5 and 85.
Nice.
And I really like working with people of all stripes.
Cool. When you were going through the Queen's program and you started writing, do you remember why you started writing?
Yes, I do. No, it's not a good reason. I started writing because we had to do a director's project for my directing course, and I really couldn't find a play that I liked because they had to be 20 minutes, they were short.
Right.
And the idea of producing or directing rather only a scene seemed dumb. Yeah. I could find lots of plays that I liked, but I couldn't find any 20-minute plays that I liked. And I didn't want to just do scenes, so I wrote a play so that I could direct that, I guess. And then I got a bit hooked on that. So then I did an undergrad thesis in my final year where I wrote a musical. It's a really excellent academic exercise and a really terrible musical as a result. That I wrote with a friend of mine, and then when I first moved to Toronto, I was writing a musical, a new musical that I knew I was writing, and so then that kind of just seemed like that was the thing I did. And I think I've really come to understand that every writer's process is really, really different. And one of the things that I think we do really well as a community is shame people for not having the same process as someone else. And we love to talk about the writers who get up at 6 a.m. and make themselves a pot of tea and then sit down at their desk and write for 8 hours straight, taking a break only for lunch, and then you'll be the next Noel Coward or whatever. And that's never been my process because I am fed by the world that I live in artistically. And so for me, teaching, I need to know something that's not just making plays in order to make good plays. Yeah. So teaching is a big part of that for me.
It's interesting about the shaming of practice. People having different practice. I know for me, when I'm writing, every time I sit down to write, I'm working in a different way. Yeah. And I've never been one who can like sit down and write for 8 hours. I did it once. I was a basket case for the rest of the week. And I was reading Stephen King's book on writing about how, Stephen King, who writes like, you must write like all the time, but apparently he only writes 1,000 words a day. Yeah. And then he puts it away and he goes and does something else. Yeah.
I think it depends. I did the Stratford Playwrights Retreat a couple of years ago, which is such a great gift. And Bob White, who runs that program and new play development at Stratford in general, is a genius and a really kind, supportive, incredible man and an incredible dramaturg and just a really... He knows what he's doing for writers. And the joy of that program is that you are not expected to hand any specific thing in. You are also not given like actors or anything. You're just given space. They put you up in a place. They give you like a living wage so that you don't have to worry about losing a bunch of money. They pay for your way there. They pay for your way back. And they say you can go and see the shows if you want, or you can not if you want. And you can come to dinner sometimes if you want, or you can not if you want. And that kind of flexibility. Yeah. Those days I wrote for 8 hours, some of them, because I had, that worked. But acknowledgement of different processes, I think, is a really important part of it. And so for me, would I like to be less busy sometimes, and make less choices based on needing money? Yeah, sure. Of course I would, as would everyone in any job, I think. But I think my writing is better as a result of my other interests. And certainly, I've taught math in high school, and I've taught chemistry and girls phys ed and law and all sorts of other weird things that I shouldn't be teaching. And those experiences are things that have inspired me to create art out of it. Yeah.
When did you start producing on your own?
Well, that's interesting because I really resisted the idea of self-producing when I first started working, and I produced a musical when I first moved to Toronto at the Fringe, and it went relatively well. And then I started getting hired to produce things. That was part of my jobs that I had. Yeah. And so I really didn't want to produce for myself because I knew I couldn't pay myself. So I thought, well, I'll do this for money and then write for free. Right. And it took me 6 years to get The Way Back to Thursday produced at Theatre Passe Muraille, which I was very grateful for that opportunity and to be in their season and all of that sort of stuff. And then I had Mockingbird partially written and Shannon partially written, and Shannon 1040 is a two-hander, so that could exist in many capacities, but Mockingbird ultimately was an 11-person play. Yeah. So prior to that, I've done a bunch of other projects that I've produced myself. But again, they were part of my job. So I did some installation projects that I produced myself. But I was paid by Opera Atelier or Casa Loma or whoever. Right. So it was always part of the work. So sometimes it was producing and creating. But even I produced a show in Hatch one year at Harbourfront Centre, but it was also my show. So, right. And there's a bit of a stipend there so that you don't, starve. But when it came to thinking about Mockingbird, I've written an 11-person play. I'm a early 30s writer. No one is going to ever produce my 11-person play. Yeah. Certainly not in this country, but probably no one anywhere. So if I want it to see the light of day, I'm going to have to produce it. And then I started thinking about how Shannon 1040 was thematically so similar, and those plays seemed linked to me. And so then I don't know, I guess I just thought that we should do it. I should make that happen. So for all three plays in this series, I've worked with producers who are incredible. Lisa Lee, who's producing this, is a brilliant, amazing human being. And Liz Sheffield is produced Shannon 1040, and she is also a brilliant, amazing human being. There are so many great people working in arts communities, in administrative capacities and in artistic capacities, and everything in between. And so my sort of job as the producer is to kind of take on anything that they don't want to take on, and tell them that I'm spending my money, and if it goes south, it's okay. And it's, so I think it became just a situation where, like, I knew I had this play that no one was going to ever produce for me, and I didn't want to wait another 6 years to find someone to produce the next one, or to, keep applying to different festivals or whatever. So I just started, figuring it out.
I have to say, it's interesting that you sort of allowed yourself to write an 11-person play, because I think a lot of playwrights, with knowing that in our producing environment,
second? I just want to make sure it's on. Is it on? Oh my gosh! Okay, I just saw nothing moving, and I was like, "Oh my god, it really."
It's good.
Now I'm making you edit.
No, it's all good. In terms, like, the creating a play that has 11 people in it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of playwrights who would just be like, well, nobody's going to produce this, so I should cut down the number of characters.
Yeah.
I think it's brave of you to do that.
Yeah, some say brave, some say stupid. Okay. Right? Like, that's...
there is, yes, but, I mean, was there something that like, did you decide that it could only exist with this size of cast?
I like to set myself challenges when I write, most of the time. So, my musical, The Way Back to Thursday, is a 2-person show in which it mimics almost exactly the structure of an 18th century song cycle, because that seemed like something I should try to figure out how to do. Like, it actually created a bunch of limitations, and I work really well with boundaries and limits, so that was a big part of it, is that I had never written anything with more than 5 people. And I guess I thought, like, okay, well, you should learn how to do that if you would like to consider yourself a playwright.
Yeah.
The joy of writing for 11 people is enormous, because it's hard, but also then you have 11 different perspectives to play with.
Right. And
that is so fun, to have those 11 different perspectives weigh in on something. So I guess I started writing it actually before I went to the Stratford retreat, and then I finished it while I was there, and I sort of took it to Bob, and I was like, all I need you to tell me is whether or not I should keep writing this play. And he's like, well, no one's going to produce it. And I said, no, I know, but, like, is it worth me producing it? Like, is it worth it for me to keep writing this play so that I can produce it?
Right.
And he's like, yeah, absolutely. I like this play a lot. And I was like, great. Well, then I guess I'll do that. Why not? It's not like, producing an 11-person play versus producing a 2-person play is a little bit different because there's more people involved.
Yeah.
But the action of producing the play is the same.
Right.
It's just more expensive. And then we did it in a festival, so then it was less expensive.
Yes.
Like, it's working out those nuts and bolts is fun. That's part of the artistic job, I think, is figuring that out. And then, there are people who I'm sure, who I have spoken to people who said, well, can you write it with less than 10? Because then someone could actually consider producing it. And I said, no, like, that's the play. I wrote an 11-person play. I'll write a 9-person play someday, but this is my 11-person play.
When you were writing the play, were there points where you were worried that there were characters that weren't, like, that were being lost?
Totally. Oh my gosh, all the time. Yes, absolutely. I ended up, like, doing several sort of readings to myself where I had a square of paper on my desk and then a bunch of pennies, and I would put, because it all happens in one room.
Right.
So I would put the penny in when the character was entered, and then take them out when they exited, because otherwise I would forget to have them exit.
They were there.
Or forget to have them enter, and just write them. And so that that sort of technical stuff is fun to figure out, and figure out where they could all go and what all their exits are and why they're exiting and all of that sort of business. But I don't like I just figured it out, I guess. You lose track of people all the time, but I think I knew enough about the play, and I knew enough about the characters in the play that there were, I would say in that play, there are like 4 people who have a specific amount of time on stage, and it is not the whole play.
Right.
And there's a reason why they are there, and they must be in the play, but they are only on stage for a specific amount of time.
Right.
So, that makes it a bit easier, because then it's really a 7-person play with 4 sort of ancillary characters.
To get back to trigonometry, you were just when I came in, you were saying that you had rehearsed in January.
Yeah.
And then had some time where you could be a producer.
Yeah.
And now you're back into rehearsal.
Yeah.
Because you open this play
we open next Thursday.
Next Thursday.
Yeah, on March 16th. March 16th to the 25th. Buy tickets now.
Where?
Factory Theatre in the studio.
Oh, in the studio, okay.
It's a regular run. We open on a Thursday, we close the following Saturday, etc.
Yeah.
Tickets are $15 for arts workers or $20 for everyone else. And they are available at factorytheatre.ca or by calling the Factory Theatre box office, which is 416-504-9971.
Wow.
I've written it out a lot of times. And we also have more information. We have a website that we set up for the play that's trigonometrytheplay.com.
Right.
So people can check out that too.
That rehearsal process that you had, rehearsing in January and then some time off, was that by design, or was that just the way that schedules worked?
No, it was totally just actor schedules. So I certainly wrote the play with Rose Napoli in mind for one character. She's a good friend of mine and a brilliant actor, and so I wanted her to play this role. And she's currently in a show in Barrie that I'm going to see tomorrow that I'm very excited with Talk is Free, called Offline. And it's their collective show that Rose ended up becoming sort of the one of 2 sort of head writers on. And because of her rehearsal process for that, we could rehearse before she left, and then we could open after she comes back, which is pretty much what we're doing. But as it's turned out, Andy Tridhard, who's also in that collective, is our sound designer for trigonometry, and our stage manager for trigonometry is the apprentice stage manager on that show. So I have 3 of them. I will say this idea of rehearsing, though, a month out from your show for 2 weeks and then taking a month off is from rehearsals really useful as a producer, because you also have your promotional shots and your rehearsal shots and material, but also really useful because, as I saw today, so much of what we did in that rehearsal has really settled now. People really, the character isn't in its formation stages, the character is formed. Right. So now the brush up is just really a memorization brush up. Do you remember where you stand when and what the next line is? But the intentions are all clear. And the subtext is all clear, and all that table work stuff has a lot more time to settle in. So it certainly wasn't a by design process, but it might be one that I design in the future, because it's ended up working. I mean, knock on wood, it's ended up working really well so far. So we hope it continues to work well into opening.
Have you noticed a difference in the way that, like, from that last rehearsal to this brush up, did things settle more? Like, what's the difference in the way that the characters are from that last one to? Well,
if we had, the final rehearsal before, if we had been going into tech right after that rehearsal, I would have been nervous. Not because, they're all brilliant actors, but they're brilliant actors who had been working in a 2-week rehearsal process and not even full days in those 2 weeks, and so they're accessing this material. It's a 75-minute play, but it's just talking, and it's a dense sort of. It's not dense. It's complex in its interweaving. So once you figure out the story, for each of those characters, that takes 3 days in and of itself.
Yeah.
And so everything felt like we were just scraping the surface of it. They could do it. They moved in all the right ways. They shouted at all the right times and whispered at all the right times and made jokes and all of the stuff that you do. But today, what we started to find was really deep settling into an actual character perspective on all of those things. So you're seeing it come from not just a really skilled actor who can make it look seamless, but actually an actual character on stage. And that would have happened in the run for sure had we run after we rehearsed the first time, but it maybe wouldn't have happened by opening night.
Right.
And I think that that's one of the dangers that happens in Canadian theatre all the time, is that because so many of our rehearsal processes are so short, we always get there, the actors always get there, but they maybe don't get there right away. And if we are doing things like taking reviews into consideration, etc., which we all know that reviews are a part of an artistic ecology, but maybe not the be all and end all of it. But that can be nerve-wracking, knowing that you're arriving at opening night and you're not quite as prepared as you'd like to be. Yeah. Whereas I feel like this kind of process, at least for me, this time, and talk to the actors, maybe they tell you something totally different. But for me, it's felt a lot calmer because we've been able to really sink our teeth into something and then settle in it and then ask even more intelligent questions later on.
In terms of not just the performances, but the comfort with the material has deepened.
I hope so. Certainly, right now they're all stressed about learning their lines.
Of course,
because there's lots of lines and it's contemporary text, so it's all interruptions and cut-offs and all of that sort of annoying stuff. They were telling me today that they wish that it was Shakespeare because then it would be easier to memorize. Comfortability with the material, because we've also worked it out. We've figured it out already. Yeah.
Just a matter of remembering.
Yeah. Which is no small task, but but they, I think, are up for it.
In terms of all this more than almost a month of not rehearsing when you've been doing the production stuff. Yeah. Do you thrive on that, or is that something that you just sort of suffer through?
Not rehearsing?
No, producing, the producer's job.
Well, yeah, again, I'm lucky that I'm working with an actual producer, right? Lisa Lee is incredible, so I'm really supporting her and working primarily in the regular director sort of role, like talking to designers and that kind of thing. But I like all of that. I like thinking about what Instagram post we're putting up this week and how and why and all of that. I like thinking about what, the marketing plan and what is coming up next and when we're all going to change our cover photo on Facebook and talking to the graphic designer about what we want the images for the show to look like, and all of those sorts of pieces of it, I think, are artistic processes. I think so often, artists tend to poo-poo producing as something that's a necessary evil, but it's an art form in and of itself. And again, working with someone as talented and skilled as Lisa Lee means that it's seamless, and the parts where I support her in that producing work are just joyful because I get to work with someone who's a genius. Which is great.
Was it more a little less stressful than trying to figure it all out yourself?
Yeah, also, I have a rule with students, which is that, when I adjudicate a festival or something, I tell them that they're not allowed to do more than 2 jobs on a show. Right. And so if I was writer, director, and producer of this play, that would be too many things.
That'd be too many things.
Because you can't do 3 things really well.
No.
Doing 2 well is possible, but hard. Yes. So, I'm willing to make that hard sort of choice, but I'm not willing to make the insane choice, which is doing 3.
Has it been difficult to switch hats from playwright to director?
Yes. My intention is not to direct my own work always, but for these 3 plays I have, just because, well, for the most part, if I'm going to spend a bunch of money producing plays independently, which is exclusively an exercise in spending money and not making it, then I'd like to spend money getting 2 credits as both a director and a writer. Which is just the reality of making theatre in Canada. Like, if I have to buy myself credits, then I'd like to buy them in both of the worlds that I'd like to be hired in. But it's difficult. It's also fun. I've sort of created, over the past 3 shows, this alter ego named Fritz, who is the playwright, Rob. And so when we're in the room, there are days when we're doing dramaturgical work. But if we have a question about the script that we can't solve, or I can't solve as a director, that's a question for Fritz. And meaning that I will not look at that until I go home and look at it on my own in a writer brain. And I try to keep that really secure separation between director Rob and writer Rob, because because I think it makes me better at both of those jobs. So if I write something and I find that is the the right cadence or the right pacing or whatever, and then I go to direct it and it doesn't work, the easy choice would be to change it right away into something that works. But actually, the job of a director is to make it work. And so I try to approach my own writing in the same way, because there's a reason I wrote it that way. Maybe I don't know what that is yet, but and so I try to work it from a directing perspective first, and then if I can't fix it, that's when I leave it for Fritz to take care of later on.
That's really, really a good idea, because I found myself in those, like,
well, then it's a pit. Then you just fix everything.
Well, then you never stop.
Yeah, like there are line changes that I'll make in rehearsal for sure, but it's a rabbit hole. Like you'll just go down forever. Yeah.
Are you on social media?
Yeah.
What do you got?
Oh, I'm everything. I got Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. I mean, I have a Snapchat, but like that's not a real.
That's not a real thing.
No.
What are your Twitter?
Usernames? My handle for all things is underscore or Rob _Kempson. So just my name with an underscore in between, which is how you would find me on Twitter or Instagram. And because we don't Timeshare, which is the company that's producing this, which is a fake company, it's like an uncompany.
Right.
We're not like, we don't have a Facebook page that you should like or anything like that. So you can just check out my we have a Facebook event for the show,
right?
All of those sorts of things.
And you have a website though.
I do. I have a personal website. Yeah. It's robkempson.com. You can also I don't even think I have any information about trigonometry on there.
You don't, because I was looking at that today. Fortunately, you do have a website for trigonometry.
I do. We have just trigonometrytheplay.com is the trigonometry website, and that is also a reflection on us sort of as this uncompany. For each new play, we make a new website and we just say, like, this is all the information you need to know about this play.
Right.
Because chances are not that good that you want to know about, like, the last plays that my fake company produced. I sometimes think that companies that are driven by a single directorial voice or a single writing voice are not so much companies as actually just, like, the collected works of that artist.
Yeah.
And that's really valuable, but I think we have a tendency to want to call those companies
something,
which seems redundant to me. I mean, in dance, they don't do that.
No.
Just, it's Peggy Baker Dance, which is Peggy Baker's work. And I really appreciate that clarity. And I also know that when I go to see a show, I am thinking about which artists have worked on it. And so if it's always the same artist at the top of that echelon, then that's actually just the work of that artist that I'm interested in. So I'm not making I'm not going to say that Timeshare will never become a real company, but right now certainly that's not the intention. It's just a bank account and a forum by which I can produce work and other people can produce work under it as well.
Yeah. Always one of those interesting questions of what to do, especially when you're in that situation when you are like writing and producing your own work. Do you call it like Rob Kempson Productions, or do you call it like, what do you do with that? I've gone back and forth on that myself.
Well, we call it Timeshare because it is a timeshare. So the intention of the company is that anyone who's part of our collective can choose to produce under that title. They can choose to apply for grants under that title. They can choose to, and other people have. So right now, that's what it'll be. It'll be sort of a bank card that gets passed around.
Yeah.
And we'll see.
That's great.
How long that lasts. I don't know.
Well, this has been great. Thank you so much for talking with me today.
Oh my gosh, thank you. Thank you so much for taking interest in the show and taking the time to come all the way up here and hang out in my basement.
Absolutely, thank you.